I, Andrew Withers, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
On this week's show, I want to bring up the Fort Hood shooting and possible solutions. I wanted to give it some time to die down and bring a more rational thought process to making sure it doesn't happen again. Before I get into this, I want to give my military background and my unique perspective on the subject. Between the National Guard and the U.S. Army, I have 23 years of military service, from infantry to armor. I have 2 deployments, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, I own guns, and have never posed a threat to anyone.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Rick, thanks. Thank you. We're tracking the breaking news out of Fort Hood, Texas. There's been a mass shooting at the Army post there. It's the largest in the world. At least 7 people are dead and a number of people are hurt, perhaps as many as 15, maybe more. There are multiple shooters, and not one, but at least 2, we are now told. Our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, has been following the fast-moving developments for us. Update our viewers what we know, Barbara.
Wolf, according to all of the military officials we've talked to over the last several minutes, here's the emerging picture. 1:30 this afternoon Central Time. At least 2 shooters began this incident on Fort Hood. We believe at this hour 7 people dead, 12 to 15 wounded, taken to the Darnell Medical Center, possibly more wounded. We do not know how many of the dead and wounded are military, how many are civilian. Fort Hood is a massive installation. Tens of thousands of military and civilian personnel work there. As you just saw, Rick Sanchez interviewing Sergeant Major Jamie Poston at Fort Hood. He said 1 shooter has been apprehended. They are looking at this hour for another shooter. The base is in lockdown. Nobody in, nobody out.
Wolf, the troops normally, they rotate off to Afghanistan or Iraq. A lot of them do, at least from Fort Hood. Is that right?
Absolutely, Wolf, and in fact that may prove to be critical in this incident. One of the shooting locations was a soldier processing center and a nearby theater complex next door, but the soldier processing center is the area where troops move in and out. When they come back to Fort Hood from tours in Iraq or Afghanistan, they come through this facility. When they process out of Fort Hood to go to the war zone, they go through there. There's always a lot of traffic in that area, a lot of soldiers lined up, coming and going all the time. To be clear, Wolf, we don't have very many facts about this, but Fort Hood is an installation that has had very heavy deployments. They have had issues with suicides, combat stress down there. We have no idea if that played a role in any of this, but these young troops that come through Fort Hood have seen an awful lot of combat action. Those of them that have come back certainly thought they were at Fort Hood safe back at home. And now this terrible incident, Wolf.
Yeah, we just want to stress we have no idea why these shooters, and the spokesman for the base says there were at least 2 shooters, 1 apprehended, 1 still on the loose right now. We have no idea what the motive was, if there's any rational motive indeed at all. Barbara, stand by. Your colleague Chris Lawrence is in Kabul, Afghanistan right now, our other Pentagon correspondent. Chris, you recently were at Fort Hood in Texas, and Barbara was just saying how U.S. troops rotate in and out of Fort Hood on the way to where you are in Afghanistan now, also to Iraq.
That's right, Wolf, and not only that, but they rotate in and out of the service. I was told when I was there that about every month, about 1,000 soldiers there at Fort Hood get out of the Army and try to transition back to the civilian world. So it is a base that is constantly in flux from those in combat, returning to combat, those preparing to go to combat, and then those returning to their civilian life. we were at an area where people were looking at resumes, trying to get their job prospects lined up. A lot of soldiers just continually flowing from that area, trying to set up things in terms of getting out of the service. So it is a very dynamic base in that respect. Well,
and it's huge. The whole complex is huge. It's described as the largest U.S. military facility in the world, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we were at this this readiness center where a lot of the soldiers would come in and they would start the process of getting out of counselors, things like that, and then we went to go interview a young woman who was getting out of the Army, and we had to drive a good, well over 45 minutes on the base. It was just a different part of the base. It is a big base, a varied base in terms of the skills and the MOSs and the number of jobs that different personnel have on that base as well.
As we're speaking, we're getting a statement in from U.S. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas, and this incident taking place in Texas, Fort Hood, Texas. Let me read it to you and our viewers. I'm shocked and saddened by today's outburst of violence at Fort Hood that has cost 7 of our brave service members their lives and has gravely injured others. My heart goes out to their loved ones. Our dedicated military personnel have sacrificed so much in service to our country, and it sickens me that the men and women of Fort Hood have been subjected to this senseless, random violence. I know all Americans share this concern for the soldiers and their families who are affected by this tragedy. That statement from Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, who's going to be joining us shortly here in the Situation Room. Let's go to our senior White House correspondent, Ed Henry. They're getting some reaction over there at the White House. I'm sure the president by now has been notified, Ed.
That's right. Well, 2 significant points. Number one, Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary, we're told by top officials, informed the president a short time ago, based on media reports, other information coming into the White House about the fact that they believe at least 7 people are dead at Fort Hood, many more injured. That's significant that it's now reached the level of the president. But second, and perhaps more importantly, I'm told by top officials here that staff here at the White House, at least, have gathered in the Situation Room here at the White House in order to collect information from the Pentagon and other sources. Perhaps a precautionary measure. We don't want to push that too far and read too much into it. But as you know, when there are other shootings, it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of going into the White House Situation Room for top officials to sort of monitor it. That could be just a sensitivity because of the fact that it's on a military base. It also could be just a precautionary measure to make sure that there are not more gunmen, make sure that they know everything about what's happening on the ground there, Wolf.
And so stand by because I know you're getting more information from your sources at the White House. We'll get back to you. Retired U.S. Army General Russell Honore is joining us on the phone right now. General Honore, you served at Fort Hood. Remind our viewers when you were there and what your capacity was.
Yes, I was there as Deputy Commander of the 1st Cavalry Division for 2 years in 1998 to 99. Fort Hood is the home of the 1st Cavalry Division, one of the most deployed units in the United States Army, in the 3rd Armored Cavalry Division, as well as the home of 3rd U.S. Corps, which is the Corps headquarters station at Fort Hood. They've been in and out of Iraq repeatedly since the war started.
And explain to our viewers what the Corps means, because this is a huge number of troops.
Yeah, Corps is basically the headquarters that goes to Baghdad. The size of it controls up to 5 to 6 divisions, and it is the major command operates in and around Iraq at this time. And the Corps headquarters is home now, but the headquarters of the 1st Cavalry Division is deployed to Iraq as we speak.
And that Corps could be 80,000, maybe even 100,000 troops. Is that right?
That is correct. They're the major combat headquarters in Iraq. Is what the rotating mission of the 3rd Corps, which is the senior headquarters at Fort Hood. As I said, joined by the 1st Cavalry Division, which is in Iraq now, the division headquarters, and the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment. There's been no report coming from my sources at Fort Hood that changed the number of dead or wounded. However, in my recent source, the siren system, the people warning system, one of those systems that was installed post 9/11. The loudspeaker I just heard telling people to take immediate cover, Take shelter immediately, stay inside, and turn off all heating and air conditioning. That post is on lockdown as we speak. You can't get off, you can't get in. You are reminded that Fort Hood has several schools on its post, schools that my kids went to. It's about the time that they need to get out. It's also a day at Fort Hood when they let soldiers off so they can spend time with their families. So a lot of families moving in and around, and it's absolutely a situation now I feel for those families and those soldiers and that command that's dealing with this situation now. And there's a lot of unknowns, Wolf, and all this information is first report. And as we know, first reports sometimes are not correct. But that's what we've learned within the last few minutes.
I know you're speaking to your sources over there at Fort Hood, Texas, General Honore, and I'm glad you point out that these initial reports sometimes can be right, sometimes can be wrong. So we want to put that caveat out there. Under normal circumstances, what would be the procedure in a huge base like this where there were snipers or a shooting incident, at least 2 shooters involved and 7 dead, maybe 12 to 15 already reported injured? Walk us through the lockdown, how that is carried out.
First is a physical, then
Now that we know all the facts, does anyone else think this was anything other than terrorism?
Very complex, ongoing situation at this hour, but we want to emphasize information still very sketchy, Aaron.
And we have some video, Barbara, that's just coming in. And given the fluid nature of this is off of Instagram. Everybody, you're looking at this. And you're hearing this loop, Barbara. This is as they're giving the warning. You can hear someone, in distress or fear there. There's been reports that this could have happened at a medical center on Fort Hood. There's been reports of perhaps one casualty. I mean, there are so many questions at this point. Can you tell us anything at all about whether there is one shooter, whether there are many shooters, anything about casualties, or at this point, really, we just don't know?
Well, I don't think we do. That looks to me like it's a housing area at Fort Hood.
Yeah.
And that is worth remembering. There are families with children who live.
This is a special report from ABC News Digital.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Pfeffer in New York with this ABC News Digital special report. And right now, the mayor of Washington, D.C. and the police chief are holding a press conference on that shooting at the Navy Yard where 4 people were shot and killed. Let's listen in.
At the time that we last reported to you, we did not have a definite number, and we're still working on a definite number of fatalities, but at this hour, it appears that we have at least 12 fatalities, and we're continuing to try to ascertain how serious this situation is, and it doesn't get much more serious than that, obviously. We have one of the officers for the Metropolitan Police Department is injured. He appears to be, is going to be fine as far as we know. We have no known motive at this stage. There were people who asked earlier if this was a terrorist event. We don't have any reason to think that at this stage, but we're continuing that investigation to try to determine what the motive is. We also don't know for certain whether there are other shooters. There have been reported other people in the building at the time. We're continuing to engage in that investigation. And we'll have better information on that later in the afternoon. We'll be back here at 4 o'clock. We'll be back for another press briefing at 4 o'clock. But now let me ask Chief Lanier. She will come up and provide some more detailed information on some of these issues.
I just want to first start off by saying, and as far as the initial response here this morning, you've heard that we have at least one officer with gunshot wounds that is currently being treated, but the response by uniformed police officers from both the Metropolitan Police Department and United States Park Police was absolutely nothing short of heroic. With at least 12 confirmed dead at this point, I think the actions by the police officers without question help to reduce the number of lives lost. So our hearts go out to the families of certainly all the victims here, but our gratitude to the frontline officers of Metropolitan Police Department and also the United States Park Police who ran into danger this morning to try and reduce the number of victims. I'll start from the top and go through quickly. Right now we're confirming at least 12 fatalities. We had a few additional folks who were injured. They were not fatally injured. We have additional officers that were injured, only one injured by gunfire at this point, some other injuries sustained by multiple different police agencies on the large response inside. We are officially now transitioning to an FBI lead, so the FBI will lead the investigation. The entire investigation will be processed and handled as a unified process. But with that said, any additional information that anybody might have that they want to share for the investigation, you can call 1-800-CALL-FBI, 1-800-CALL-FBI. I have a slight update on the lookout for potentially 2 additional individuals involved in the shooting. The first is for a white male between 40 and 50 years of age, white male wearing a tan, what appears to be military uniform consistent with naval uniform and a beret-style hat. We also have a lookout for a black male between the ages of 40 and 50 and an olive military-style uniform. He is about approximately 5'10", 180 pounds, medium complexion with gray sideburns, graying sideburns. We have no indication of any motive at this time. We are updating and asking for family members. We know a lot of folks have cell phones and can contact family members, but if you're looking for contact with any of your family members that may have been inside of the Navy Yard today, NCIS has established a phone number now for reunification. That number is 202-433-6151. A secondary number, 202-433-9713. Right now we have an impact to the area. Obviously a large part of the area is still on lockdown. We're still asking residents to stay out of the area and remain in your home. We do feel like the area is safe, but we do still have an active search for potentially additional suspects right now, so we're asking people to please remain in their homes and stay out of the area. Again, there's multiple agencies here. We've gotten support from a lot of our counterparts in the region, Maryland and Virginia, as well as all the federal agencies here in Washington, D.C. There are very, very few questions that we can answer at this point. Still a lot of information come. We will be doing another update in 2 hours. I think at this point we would take a limited number of questions. We would ask please for your patience, and then we'll go from there.
Who should stay home?
We've asked people to stay out of the area around the Navy Yard. We have sent out text alerts to the residents around the area and asked them to please stay out of this area at this time until we send out an additional follow-up.
Why do you believe there were 2 additional potential shooters? Did they engage the officers, or were they seen, or why? How did this happen?
The question is why do we believe there's 2 additional suspects? Right now we have multiple pieces of information that would suggest that we have at least 2 other individuals that were seen with firearms. We know both of those individuals were wearing military-style uniforms, but did not mean that we do not know if they are actually military employees. But these are people that we really believe that are involved in some way, and we're trying to locate those individuals.
What about the shooter who was dead? What can you tell us about the shooter who was dead?
I can't tell you anything at this point. I can't comment on anything related to anything on evidence or anything on the scene right now. I'll take 2 more questions.
The description of possible suspects, does that come from eyewitness or video camera footage?
I'm not going to comment on that. We have reason to believe that these people may be involved and we need to talk to them.
Were there victims in more than one building, or did you find victims in different buildings as well?
I'll say this, we are still doing an extensive search. This is a large base. We've got multiple agencies and multiple teams. The remainder of this search could take another couple of hours, so we're not going to comment on the location of any evidence or anything like that, but I'd say in the next 2 hours we do our next update. Our next briefing will be at 200 I Street. For those of you, so we are not here in the middle of the street. We want to clear out this area, so Next briefing will be in 2 hours, 200 I Street, and we will try and answer more questions then if we can. That's all we can take right now. Thank you very much.
Does not include the shooter, right? The 12 dead does not include the shooter.
And that is the latest from Washington, D.C., as we have now just heard from the D.C. police there in that briefing that the FBI has now taken the lead in the investigation of that shooting that happened at the Navy Yard base just about 20 minutes after 8 o'clock this morning. The updated information that we did learn is that there are now at least 12 fatalities from that shooting at the Navy Yard this morning, a facility where about 3,000 people work. As we've been hearing, it is still on a very active search basis, that there are parts of the Navy Yard and the surrounding areas that are still on lockdown. And as we just heard there, that there is still the potential for 2 other shooters possibly involved in this shooting. And the description, 2 men, one a white male, as described as wearing a tan military-style uniform, and the other a black male between 40 and 50 years old wearing an olive military-style uniform. They did not say exactly whether or not they believe either one of those men, the potential lookout, if they are members of the military, but simply that they were dressed in military-style clothing. And when asked by a reporter why there is the belief that there potentially could be those 2 other shooters, you just heard that from the news conference, in fact, that they were 2 men that were seen on the scene with firearms, and that is what is causing that search to continue on in Washington, D.C. But again, the latest information that has been coming out of there from that news conference is that at least 12 people were now shot and killed from that early morning shooting just as the rush hour was beginning in Washington, D.C. We have a complete report on abcnews.com as police are continuing to comb through that area, and parts of which are still on lockdown. And we will interrupt and bring you live news conferences, the next of which will be held at 4 o'clock with any new information as that warrants. For now, I'm Dan Kleffler in New York with this ABC News Digital Special Report.
The gunman Monday night shooting aboard the USS Mahan is a checkered past that most recently landed him inside a North Carolina prison. Late Thursday afternoon, the Navy released the name of the gunman. He's 35-year-old Jeffrey T. Savage. Court records and news accounts show Savage was convicted of manslaughter in North Carolina in 2008. His victim in that killing was found dead along the side of Interstate 85 outside of Charlotte. Prison records show Savage was released a year, was a convicted felon, but until Monday night shooting had not been accused of any other major crimes since his release from prison in 2000.
This sentry was required to carry the weapon in amber status, which means a magazine in the weapon. However, the chamber was empty. A fellow sailor was shot 4 times before a weapon could be brought to bear. Sound logical to you? We've had shootings on numerous military installations in recent years, and the response by the DoD police, although they do the best they can, 10 to 15 minutes is next to worthless. Soldiers are trained not to take combat lying down. A mass shooting is basically close combat, and to leave those trained to engage in close combat helpless is nothing less than dereliction of duty.
Okay. Christopher, you can start. You Christopher?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. My name is Chris Coleman. I'm a member of the Texas Army National Guard. I serve out of North Fort Hood at Mates in Gatesville. I come here today to speak for First Lieutenant Patrick Cook of the 49th Transportation Battalion, Fort Hood, Texas. He was a victim of the Fort Hood current shooting. He wrote a letter, and he would like for y'all to hear it.
Be happy to hear it.
To my friends, fellow Texans, brothers in arms, members of the committee, and everyone within the sound of my voice. Greetings. My name is First Lieutenant Patrick Cook of the 49th Transportation Battalion, Fort Hood, Texas. And this past Wednesday, I found myself trapped in an enclosed room with 14 of my fellow soldiers, one of whom was barricading the door against a madman with a .45 pistol when he was fatally shot. Through what I can only describe as a miracle, he somehow found enough strength to continue pushing against the door until the shooter gave up and went elsewhere, at which time he collapsed. Nearly a week later, I can still taste his blood in my mouth from when I and my comrades breathed air into his lungs for 20 long minutes while we waited for a response from the authorities. This soldier's name was Sergeant First Class Daniel Ferguson, and his sacrifice loaned me the rest of my life to tell this story. But I write to you today not to memorialize this brave soldier nor to tell a war story about how we made the best of a losing situation, but to express the part of the story that in some high positions of power clearly do not want told. I knew this was going to happen. I had been saying it for 5 years that Fort Hood was a tinderbox for another massacre waiting to happen. It had to happen because our betters failed to learn the obvious lesson of 5 years ago. Worse yet, I know it will happen again. More will die, more will be wounded, more families will be torn apart needlessly. It happened again, and it will happen again because Fort Hood is a gun-free zone. When the first shots rang out, my hand reached for my belt for something that wasn't there, something that could have put a stop to the bloodshed, could have made it merely an ugly incident instead of the horrific massacre that I will surely remember the darkest 20 minutes of my life. Stripped of my God-given right to arm myself, the only defensive posture I had left was to lie prostrate on the ground and wait to die. As the shooter kicked at the door, I remember telling myself, "Oh well, this is it." It is beneath human dignity to experience the utter helplessness I felt that day. I cannot abide the thought that anyone should ever have to feel that again. At the point-blank range at which this shooting occurred, anyone with an M9 and some basic instruction could have ended the mayhem as quickly as it began. An MP by trade and CHL holder, I am convinced that the concealed weapons would have stopped it, but open-carried sidearms like the ones carried in law enforcement capacity could have prevented entirely. Instead, many more died because of the fatally misguided restrictions on the carrying of arms, which obviously the madman did not respect. I shall conclude by restating my warning. This will happen again and again until we learn the lesson that suppressing the bearing of arms doesn't prevent horrific crimes, it invites them. To those of you who hold elected offices, if you hear nothing else I have told you, hear this. You have the power to stop the next massacre from happening. You have an opportunity to restore the sacred right to bear arms, which has been either stripped entirely or unjustly relegated to the poor substitute of a probationary government-issued privilege. For God's sake, do the right thing. Thank you for your attention and good day. That is his letter. I would like to say one last thing, that I served my country for 12 months in Iraq. I think it is an atrocity for my country to tell me that I can carry a gun in war for 12 months to defend my country, but I can't be trustworthy here back at home. It's a disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you for the letter. The fellow that wrote this letter, does he wish to remain anonymous or something?
No, they didn't tell me he wished to remain anonymous.
Because it's not signed. Oh no, it is up here. I'm sorry, Patrick Cook. Okay. Was he injured?
No, sir, he was not, but he gave CPR
to one of the fatalities.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's a very powerful letter.
Now, roving guards, armed, have been a part of the military since armies were formed. Their role was to give early warning of trouble, defend critical assets, and repel attack. A president with no military background has taken that asset out of the equation. As an NCO, I performed the duty as Sergeant of the Guard, where I was required to carry a loaded weapon. Now, what can we do about this? There's a chain of command in the military, from the enlisted to the non-commissioned officer to the commissioned officer. They work with the troops every day. They have records showing the performance of their soldiers. Designate a set number of soldiers to carry a firearm after being checked out on the firearm. Their qualification must be up to date, a sergeant of the guard, and a set number of subordinates to act as a security detail. This would be an additional duty. Their general orders. First general order, I will guard everything within the limits of my post and quit my post only when properly relieved. Second general order, I will obey my special orders and perform all my duties in a military manner. Third general order, I will report violations of my special orders, emergencies, and anything not covered in my instructions to the commander of the relief. There's a fourth general order that I'm quite fond of. I will walk my post from flank to flank. I'll take no shit from any rank. Now let's say a soldier has a concealed carry permit and wants to carry it on post. Same standards. Has to be checked out with it, just like his service weapon. That ensures it's safe to handle and open carried with the approval of his senior sergeant, first sergeant, and company commander. In the military, we call this a force multiplier. Thanks to these policies, our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are safer in Afghanistan, where they'd be armed, than they are on their home soil. Another resource that could lower crime. 3% of population are veterans scattered throughout the country. Same standards. Have them checked out by a qualified instructor, preferably military background, and allow them to open carry. Obviously, after a background check and with the high rate of PTSD with recent veterans, a letter from a doctor saying they're fit for duty. Just because you get out doesn't mean you don't have a duty. A lot of the PTSD is due to not having that duty. They're lost. They need that direction. They need a purpose, and I know from personal experience there is that need, the sheepdog mentality. Let me explain. This is an outstanding insight into our men and women in uniform by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman.
And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me over the years and said, you know, I always thought there was something wrong with me. All my life people told me I was a wolf. I'm not a wolf. I would never harm the flock, but I yearn for a righteous battle. I yearn for an opportunity to use my skills. The sheep are all those kind, decent, gentle creatures who can only hurt you by accident or extreme provocation. And the wolf will feed the sheep without mercy. And then there's the sheepdog. The sheepdog is a predator too. The sheepdog's a meat eater too. It takes a predator to hunt a predator. But that sheepdog, if you have no propensity for violence, then you're a nonviolent citizen. If you have a propensity for violence and an absence of empathy, violence without any emotion for others, pretty good definition of aggressive sociopath or a wolf. But what if you had a propensity for violence and a love for the lambs? What if you spent a lifetime nurturing the capacity for violence and a desire to use it in a righteous battle? You know, the sheep heard about the 9/11 hijackers. They said, thank God I wasn't on that plane. The sheepdog heard about the 9/11 hijackers. They said, I wish I was on that plane. Maybe I could have made a difference. And that's that mindset. And the amazing thing is that the sheepdog, they're not destroyed by combat. They thrive in it. We have got to go into combat with what I call a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. People have scripts in their mind, and if you get in a gunfight and you say, oh my God, my life is going to go to hell, I had to kill this guy, everything's going to be shit, then that's a mental program you just gave yourself. My life is going to go to hell, everything's going to go to shit. Most people will tell you, in private, one-on-one, that when I had to shoot that bad guy, it was the culminating achievement of a lifetime of preparation. I used my skills in a life and death event to stop a deadly force threat and to save lives and to stop a bad man. It was the ultimate achievement of my lifetime, the pinnacle of a lifetime of preparation. It was a moment of great adrenaline and achievement, and all my training came together, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life. If you think about going into combat that way, and the sheepdog does, the sheepdog yearns for that opportunity, then when combat comes, you're not destroyed. You got a positive self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's so important that we don't sink into what I call the pity party. But we have this positive self-fulfilling prophecy as we go into combat. The sheepdog, they yearn for that righteous battle, and when the moment comes, they thrive on it, they take pride in it, and they get on with their lives and are able to sustain themselves and be triumphant and stronger from their experience.
To disarm someone who wants to protect, who wants to take the risk, is nothing more than dereliction of duty. And it gets people killed.